meeting of the day. I apologize for the late start, but the first meeting of the day went just a little later than expected. So I would like to call this meeting to order. Will the clerk please take roll call attendance?
Madam Chair.
Here.
Senator Archambault. Senator Raptakis. Senator Burke.
Here.
Senator Oyer.
Here.
Senator Lombardi.
Here.
Senator Quesada. Senator Rogers.
Here.
Whip de la Cruz.
Here.
There are 6 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. We have 24 bills on the agenda for hearing this evening. And in addition to the sponsors of each bill, we'll have around 25 or so witnesses registered to speak this evening on the bills. In keeping with existing virtual protocol for this committee, I would ask for a motion to hold all 24 of these bills before us for further study. May I have a motion?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Lombardi. May I have a second, please? Senator Oyer seconds that motion. Mr. Clerk, will you please take a roll call vote?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Senator Burke.
Yes.
Senator Oyer.
Yes.
Senator Lombardi.
Yes.
Senator Rogers. Whip de la Cruz.
Yes.
There are 6 in the affirmative and none in the negative.
Thank you very much. In an effort to utilize both the sponsors and the public's time more efficiently while conducting these hearings virtually, I will ask each of the sponsors, if they're present, to introduce and explain their bill. Upon conclusion of the sponsor's introduction and explanation, we will then take public testimony on each of the bills this evening. This way, if a member of the public has signed up to testify on more than one bill, they may do so at that time. First on tonight's agenda is Senate Bill number 60 by Senator Golden, an act relating to elections, Rhode Island campaign contributions and expenditures reporting. Senator Golden, I believe, is... Yes. Hello. She's with us. Yes, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. The bill that you have before you, as Chair Coyne described, will allow childcare to be an allowable use of campaign funds. This is a bill that the Senate passed last year. At the same time, the Board of Elections placed that into regulation. So it is actually the practice of our state currently. It just is not in statute because it didn't pass the House. This is a real benefit to young parents who are trying to run for office at any level in our state, so that they can use the campaign funds that they raise to offset the cost of childcare. You know, last year we heard from sitting members of city councils like Susie Alba, who talked about her own experience of needing childcare and how much it is an expense, given that we're often called upon to do things that are outside of the normal time that you would have adequate childcare. And I think certainly we all know this year from the experience of COVID how important it is and how much we value being able to have high quality, affordable childcare generally. So this is another way that we're ensuring that we address the ability for everyone who wants to run for office without being held back by the costs of childcare. And I think in your packet, you'll see that there's a letter from the General Treasurer and the Secretary of State in support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions or comments for this witness? Okay, seeing none at this time. Thank you, Senator Golden. Next is Senate Bill number 124 by Senator Calkin, an act relating to elections, campaign contributions. Welcome, Senator Calkin. You may begin your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. This bill, S0124, restores aggregate contributions limits of not in excess of $10,000 within a calendar year. So the reason I put this bill in is because a few years ago, This language was in the Rhode Island law, but a bill was passed, which I voted against, to remove this limit in order to get in line with federal law based on a controversial 5-4 McCutcheon versus FEC decision of the conservative U.S. Supreme Court, which struck down these types of limits. And now we have a system where people and PACs can throw unlimited amounts of money into our political system, and wealthy donors have the ability to influence elections, heavily influence elections. This influence can unfairly affect races and keep good people from being able to run for office, or even if you're a good incumbent, the type of money can come in and support a challenge to that good incumbent. So if we pass this bill, it won't change the current law. But if a less conservative Supreme Court were to overturn McCutcheon versus FEC, then we would have this limit ready in place. Thank you for your time, and I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Culkin. Any questions from committee members? Okay, seeing none, I believe Senator Bell is up next. Is he here? All right, why don't we move to Senate, let's see, is he gone? Okay, I don't see him here, but he will be joining us shortly. He's here? Okay, very good, Senator Bell. We have Senate Bill number 130 by Senator Bell, an act relating to elections primaries. Senator Bell, you may describe your bill.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So what this legislation does is it repeals the system where currently in primary elections, the person endorsed by the local party committee gets first ballot placement and a star next to their name. It also removes the anachronistic system where in municipal primaries, people who are not endorsed are listed alphabetically rather than randomly. There was a famous case in Johnston where someone changed their name from Russo to A. Russo, and then another person to A. Russo, in order to game this particular system. I don't think, I'm someone whose name does come earlier on in the alphabet, but I don't think that should give anyone any kind of preferential treatment. The problem with earlier ballot placement is that extensive studies do show that it conveys a meaningful impact in elections. I think it particularly conveys an impact in elections that are further down ballot. And let's be honest, most people who walk in to vote for an election for the General Assembly or something like that, probably, in many cases, maybe not most, but many cases, people are coming in, especially in a gubernatorial year, they're coming in to vote for governor. And not everyone knows who the candidates for a lower level office are. So it can have a big impact when people don't really know the candidates. And some people vote randomly. Some people don't vote. Some people vote based off the first name on the list. And sometimes people vote with the star. So it does have a real impact. And I don't think it's fair. In general, these committees tend to be controlled by incumbents. And, full disclosure, I expect, the current committee in my district will endorse me for re-election. This often happens. And I think it creates a structural imbalance, one that's really not fair, and essentially gives an advantage to incumbents. And we should have free and open elections that don't have an advantage for one particular candidate or another particular candidate. And I think this would make our elections process freer, fairer, and more democratic. There are only 3 states in the country that have a version of this system. And in New Jersey, it has recently come under extensive criticism. But the New Jersey system does allow for multiple slates of candidates to come forward. So it doesn't have quite the same incumbency bias in the way it's set up. But there's some talk in New Jersey about removing that as well. So it's somewhat anachronistic. I think it's unfair. And I think we should create fully free and fair equal playing fields in our primary elections. And making ballot placement random is, I think, an excellent way to do that. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Senator Bell. Any questions for the senator? Seeing none at this time, thank you for joining us this evening. Next up, we have Senate Bill number 181 by Senator Mack, an act relating to elections, conduct of election and voting equipment and supplies. Senator Mack? Yes, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I am introducing a repeal of the voter ID law, which was enacted in Rhode Island in 2014, I think the first year it was active. Since 2011, voter ID laws have been enacted in 11 states, and many try to attribute this increase of laws to more voter integrity. However, this is a nefarious voter suppression tactic that has led to significantly reduced voter turnout in our state. When enacted, voter IDs are a way to stop voter fraud, and these are extremely rare cases. MIT found that these happen 0.6% of the time, which is 5 times less likely that someone is to get struck by lightning. Voter ID laws, in reality, make it harder for members of our community to vote, and not just any community member. 85,000 Rhode Islanders don't have the ID necessary to vote, and that's roughly about 10% of the adult population in Rhode Island. These people are often elderly, poor, non-white, and or disabled. And voter ID laws have been proven to reduce the turnout for Black voters. In 2019, found that voter ID laws in our state have significantly impacted voter registration and turnout for young voters and low-income voters. This bill had unintended consequences since it was enacted in the last few years, and has led to devastatingly low civic engagement and participation across the state. And it was meant to address a problem that was never prevalent in our state. Neither of our neighboring states, Massachusetts or Connecticut, have photo ID requirements. And I believe that everyone in our state should have the right and access to vote with as few barriers as possible. IDs are not free. And as our population continues to age, not use cars, and as we have more reliable and more robust public transportation, we will see a larger increase of the population who will not have access or will have no use for a voter ID. And as we move to safe and secure voting by mail, that does not require voter ID like we saw during this pandemic year. Many states, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado almost vote exclusively by mail. And in our previous election, you did not need to have a valid photo identification in order to vote by mail. And it was one of the most secure elections in our nation. And with that, I look forward to any questions or comments from the committee.
Thank you, Senator Mack. Any questions from committee members? Yes, Senator Reptakis.
Yeah, just a comment and maybe a question to Senator Mack. Did you say that 85,000 Rhode Islanders don't have any IDs? I missed. I know you went really quick. I just want to make sure.
Sorry. Yes, 85,000 Rhode Islanders don't have the photo ID necessary at the
photo ID.
Yes, and that is what's required in order for them to exercise their American right to vote in any election.
Okay, the comment is because I thought the Secretary of State, she's been Secretary of State for 6 years, I thought she tried to reduce those numbers from folks having photo IDs, because most people need some type of ID, especially photo ID, to do their banking or other requests by a state agency requiring maybe public assistance or anything else. But I find that hard that number is so high up.
Yeah, so in fact, most people don't need photo ID for many of those actions, including opening up a bank account. Oftentimes, you just need an original copy of your birth certificate or your social security card, and neither of those two documents have photo ID. And they also cost about $20, if not more, to get them from the original hospital. So most common forms of photo ID include a driver's license. So if you don't drive, if you are elderly, if you have any visual impairments, or any other disabilities and you are excluded from driving, the only other options available to you are a college ID. And if you are someone who does not go the traditional route and go to a 4-year college or university or a 2-year institution, you will not have a photo ID from that institution. And also a passport. Lots of folks are prohibited from getting passports because of the cost and the documents required. And many states have only started introducing voter ID laws post-2008, leading into 2011, and a lot of that's attributed to a need for a more conservative win in our elections, and it's an undue barrier for many people to exercise, again, their American right to vote in any election.
Senator, let me ask you one more last question. Don't you think that maybe we should be pushing the Secretary of State's office or maybe the state of Rhode Island to provide free identification? I thought we were in that path of making sure we provide free voter, like a Rhode Island identification card, which does have your photo. I mean, you can't use it for driving, but for general purposes. And I'm just trying to question that one comment you made about when I walk into a bank, I thought I needed a photo ID to either open up a bank account or a checking account or any other financial instrument. I just want to make sure what you're saying is exact. And I would assist you to make sure that the state of Rhode Island issued free Rhode Island identification cards and try to track those 85,000 individuals down and say, look, have a drive saying if you don't have a photo ID, the state of Rhode Island will provide it free at no cost. I mean,
yes, and
would you agree?
Just to follow up on that. So, just to follow up on that, that is a really extensive cost for the state. In a state like Wisconsin, when they tried to implement free photo IDs, it costs anywhere between $2 and $10 million in order to implement from the state. They're also a huge barrier in order to reach out to everyone. We just finished our 10-year census. Rhode Island has a huge undercount, even though it is everyone's right to be counted in the census. There are significant barriers, including language, access to public transportation, availability of the buildings that are open. The Rhode Island DMV is only open from 9 a.m. to 3:15. Anyone who works more than one job will not be able to get there. And anyone who does not have reliable personal transportation also has a significant barrier in order to access those. So I hear your concerns, but I think the cost barrier and the transportation barrier for folks who need to access a free ID will be too burdensome, especially when our neighboring states like Connecticut and Massachusetts do not have these, and there are 15 other states that also do not have photo ID laws. And prior to 2008, a majority of states overwhelmingly did not have photo identification laws. And as we look at states like Oregon and Washington and Colorado, who vote overwhelmingly, almost exclusively by mail, they do not need photo identification in order to vote in a mail ballot.
Thank
you, Senator.
Thank you, Senators. Perhaps you can collaborate on that and discuss it more in the future. Anyone else have any questions of Senator Mack's legislation? Yes, Senator De La Cruz.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm just pulling up my notes here. Okay, let's see here. I have, so people in this country need a photo ID for everyday activities, from filling out a prescription to cashing a check. You need an ID to buy cigarettes, to buy a firearm, to buy alcohol, a hotel stay, application for public assistance, marriage licenses to get on an airplane, or even just to enter certain federal buildings. It really isn't too much to ask for an ID when it comes to exercising something so important as voting. This law passed and was eventually implemented in 2014, and it was bipartisan. Only 2 years later, the U.S. Census Bureau had 592,000 plus registered voters with 781 plus people on our voter rolls. So I would pose the question, why are we focusing on getting rid of voter ID and not cleaning up our voter rolls? I will quote my friend and former colleague, Senator Harold Metz, who sponsored the voter ID bill in this chamber. And he said, and I quote, "As a minority citizen and a senior citizen, I would not support anything I thought would present an obstacle or limit protections." I would further say that making such a blanket statement on certain groups of individuals, be elderly or whatever group you want to say, would be harmed by this legislation or is harmed by this legislation. I feel like as though we're saying, oh, they can't get an ID, as if they don't know how to get an ID, or if it's just too difficult, or 2 years isn't enough time to obtain the proper identification to vote. I just don't see that that there is a reason to remove such an important requirement. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, and to follow up on some of your comments.
Excuse me,
marriage-
Senator Mack.
Excuse me,
Senator Mack, would you go through the chair, please?
Oh, sorry. Yes, Chair. May you please direct these comments towards Senator De La Cruz?
Yes.
Some of the examples that you stated, including marriage, planes, tobacco, neither of those examples are American civil liberties that someone through the 15th Amendment has the right to do. You do not have the right to purchase a gun. You do not have the right to, or you do have the right to purchase a gun. You do not have the right to get married to anyone. You do not have the right to get on a plane. You do not have the right to be able to buy tobacco if you choose not to. But voting in the 15th Amendment is something that is guaranteed to every single American citizen, and we need to make sure that we're not introducing any barriers into those. And just to follow up on your comment, or please direct this to Senator De La Cruz, I believe that when Senator Metz introduced this legislation, he also had a few blind spots, as we all do. I will not say that I am a monolith of every single Black queer woman who exists in this state, but I will say that sometimes we introduce policy that in the time being, it seems like a good idea, but the people who are impacted, the real numbers that we have of people who are impacted by voter ID are overwhelmingly people who are elderly, people who are disabled, people who are low income, and people who are Black, Brown, and Latinx. And those are the numbers that we have since this has been enacted in 2014. I'd be happy to share those numbers and those figures with you, and some of the other states and what they do in lieu of voter ID laws, which again have not existed in the vast majority of states until 2011.
Thank you. Senator Quesada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I would like to be voted present in any vote that I missed because I was trying to be connected and I wasn't able to.
Yes.
I just had a comment to say about this bill. I completely, I disagree with my colleague, Senator Mack. I hate when people put the Latino community and the people of color, like we don't travel, we don't take vacation, we don't have a bank account, we don't drive cars, we don't do anything. My mother is 77 years old and she traveled and she don't have a license, she never drive a car, but she had a Rhode Island ID, she had a passport, she go to the bank, she go to the, most of these people get, you cannot go to a doctor's appointment so you don't have an ID because that's the first thing your doctor asks you. Then most of the elderly, and believe me, I work with elderly all the time in my district, and all of them had ID. That is not true. I disagree with you. I'm sorry, but we live in this country. You need an ID for the basic thing that you do every single day. Then I completely feel that when we present our people like we are completely like ignorance or something, it really bothered me a lot because we are not. We are people who went to college. Some people are, like I said, have cards and do all these things. And you don't need an ID to vote. You need a picture ID. It can be your license. It can be your Rhode Island ID. It can be your passport. It can be many other things. And I completely disagree with you on this ID thing. I come from a third world country, and you have to have an ID to vote. Then how do you live in this country and you're not going to have an ID to vote?
Thank you, Senator Quesada.
Yes.
Senator Archambault, would you like to be recorded present and in the affirmative for any votes that you missed?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you, and I apologize. There's some technical difficulties pulling the screen up here. Thank you very much.
And Senator Reptakis?
Same request, please.
Yes.
Same request.
It doesn't affect the votes, the final tally. Yes.
Yes, Madam Chair, one final comment.
Yes, please make it brief because we have a long agenda. Yes, go ahead, Senator Mack.
Yes, and the intention of stating my identities and the identities of people who are impacted by these voter ID laws is in no way to say that we are ignorant, that we do not participate in driving, or that we do not participate in higher education, or we do not have passports. But the data does suggest that folks who are Black, Brown, and low income have significantly more barriers to access those types of things, including cost. People who live in rural communities have more distances to travel, and I'd be happy to share more information. Voter ID laws have also been a talking point and have been a big opposition point for organizations like the NAACP, the Negro Coalition sorry, I can't think of words right now, but the NAACP and the ACLU and several other organizations that fight for the civil liberties of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people across our nation. And I believe that we need to look at the facts and not address our feelings. The voter ID laws were only implemented in the last few years, again, because of the fear that more Black and Brown people are exercising their right to vote. Again,
Thank you, Senator.
Someone's human right to vote.
Thank you, Senator Mack.
Thanks.
Perhaps you can share that data and information with the colleagues who had questions.
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? Thank you. The next bill we're going to is Senate Bill number 184 by Senator Sosnowski. You actually have two bills on the agenda, so if you want to talk about both an act relating to elections mail ballots on Senate Bill number 184 and number 185, an act relating to elections mail ballots early voting. Welcome, Senator Chair Sosnowski.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Coyne. Yes, I would like to speak to both of those, and I thank you for taking these up this evening. I know you do have a lengthy agenda. The first bill, 184, the act would remove the requirement that mail ballot voters sign necessary mail ballot documents in front of a notary public and or signed in the presence of two witnesses. And the other bill, 185, the act would authorize early voting for registered and eligible electors in all elections for the 20 days before an election at designated city and town locations with advance public notice and regulated by rules promulgated by the State Board of Elections. The board will be assisted in its rulemaking by a temporary, in-person early voting advisory committee composed of interested parties that would sunset on December 31st, 2021. And the reason for both of these bills, this, as we all know, what we've been through this past year was quite different, but also very enlightening to see so many people turn out to vote. It was great. But constituents overwhelmingly requested that I submit both these pieces of legislation. These bills are about making voting easier, more accessible, to enable all registered voters to vote, whether it's in good weather or bad weather, in sickness or in health, or emergency situation, because people work different working hours. And I want people to be able to exercise their vote and feel safe, secure, and unintimidated when they vote. And I think we should be doing everything possible to make it easier for all people to vote, and these bills would help to do that. And I'd be glad to answer any questions if you have any. And again, thank you for the opportunity to.
Thank you, Chair Sosnowski. Do we have any questions from committee members? Yes, Senator
Madam Chair,
Ajimbo.
not a comment, but not a question, but a comment for Senator Sosnowski. I want to thank him for Senate Bill 185. I think that should be a permanent law. That voting early turned out to be a great asset for a lot of voters to come out 20 days before, not have to worry for that certain one day. Everybody's got a busy schedule, so I hope we support her bill, Senate Bill number 185, and make it the law of the land of the state of Rhode Island. Thank you, Senator Sosnowski.
Thank you. Senator Ajimbo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment on 184. I really like it, and I think that loosening the requirement that you have two witnesses notarize the thing in front of you. I mean, you have to do that when you make a will. I mean, that's a pretty high standard. If you've got an identification on you and people know who you are and you're signing the thing attesting to it, identification if you're in person, but if you're signing attesting to it, it almost sounds like disenfranchisement if you can't get the two people. So I like it a lot. I think it's a good bill, and it comes from empirical experience. So who lived it? We all lived it. So thank you, Senator Sosnowski.
Any other questions? I see none at this time. Next bill is Senate Bill number 247 by Senator Acosta, an act relating to elections mail ballots. Senator Acosta, if you would like to explain that.
Madam Chairwoman, thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you to the rest of the members of the committee. I understand you guys have a double dip session today, and you've been really putting in the work, so I'll try to make this as brief as possible. I want to frame my bill within the context of democracy as a continuous variable rather than a categorical one. So we tend to think about democracy as either democratic or not. And I think a better way to think about it is things can get more democratic or less democratic. And as our Senate colleague just mentioned, we just had a great experience seeing how we could make voting easier and more accessible for more Rhode Islanders. And so we had an amazing turnout this past election, despite the fact that we were living through a pandemic. And we found that there was no evidence of widespread voter fraud. And so what this bill sets out to do is codify some of the things that we did in this last election and make voting easier, make our voting process more democratic over time. Now, as we speak today, Rhode Island is one of two states, the other being Alabama, that has this type of onerous mail ballot process. And so I think that's embarrassing for us. That's something that we're trying to fix, to remediate. And so what my bill does is a few things. The first is that it strikes the 2 witness notary requirements. That's on page 1 through 2 and 3 and 4. The second is that it makes it so that absentee ballots may be requested online. Right now, you could register online with your driver's license and your information. And so you should also be able to request your mail ballot online. It also allows voters to opt into voting absentee permanently. So if that is your preferred method of voting, then you should be able to do that in every election without having to fill out an application every single election cycle. And finally, it strikes the misnomer that currently reads emergency voting and makes it so that we call it what it is, which is early in-person voting, right? So the Senate colleague had just mentioned how making it so that folks could vote 20 days before the election opened up the amount of people that could come in and vote, folks that might not have been able to vote on election day. And so this early in-person voting would be open 20 days before the election day and would include at least one weekend. You can find that on pages 7 through 8. I recognize and want to show appreciation to my colleagues, Senator Sosnowski, Senator Oyer, Chairwoman Coyne, who have bills that address many of these issues. I have no type of ego regarding this stuff. And so if those are the bills that we go with, as long as they accomplish the things that I just outlined, I'd be happy to support those going to the floor rather than this. If you guys feel like this is the one, then let's make it this one. But happy to answer any questions now. And thank you again to the entire committee.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions for Senator Acosta? Yes, Senator De La Cruz.
I actually don't have a statement. I just a statement about these bills regarding early voting, as Senator Acosta and Senator Sosnowski pointed out. My fear is that it's normalizing COVID protocols for elections when COVID obviously was something where we needed to expand voting for 20 days because we wanted people to be distant and we wanted them to feel safe when they were voting. But to normalize them, it doesn't seem the right thing to do because prior to the pandemic, there was really no talk of it. It wasn't necessary. So I just question whether or not this is the right thing to do at the moment.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chairwoman, if I may?
Yes, Senator Acosta.
I would just say that today you'll also hear from the Board of Elections, the organization and the institution that helped us carry this out. And I think they'll speak to not just the amount of people that were able to come out that might not have been able to come out even during a normal election on election day, but also the fact that this was a relatively low-level lift. It doesn't take that much work to open up a Board of Canvassers site for people to vote in all of their municipalities. And so it's not asking a lot. I think the Board of Canvassers in most towns are on board with this, and you'll hear today from the Board of Elections, which also supports this.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, Senator Archambault.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, I to hop into the discussion, there's a guy that does a lot of criminal law and prosecutes and does defense work, and was a police officer like you, Chairwoman. I'm always mindful of potential for voter fraud. We never want to tolerate voter fraud, but something more overwhelmingly is coming through my mind, and that is I'm thinking of Alice de Tocqueville in Democracy in America, he talked about this civic life that we have and the civic obligation of the community, called them townships. And there's a responsibility we have morally, the fabric of the townships, to vote. Now, we are fortunate to live in New England where we actually still call it towns, and the state's so small, you know, there's half a degree of separation. The world's small, but, you know, if there's no voter fraud, and people can get out earlier to cast their votes, and we can verify that it's really the person. Honestly, I think that's a good thing. I think that's in keeping with the civic compass that de Tocqueville observed when he wrote his treatise. You know, I'm okay with it if there's no voter fraud. I think it promotes civic well-being, and it's good for the community, for people to talk earlier, get out, vote earlier, and as Senator Costa said, the Board of Elections has gotten behind these bills. But I think it's good that Senator Dela Cruz is a watchdog on this stuff. I think that's good. But I support it for all those reasons.
Thank you, Senator Archambault. Any other? Yes, Senator Oyer.
I also just wanted to point out, in addition to add to this discussion, that even prior to COVID, we did have an emergency voting period that was about 20 days. And so, you know, I think that, you know, I'm actually not as concerned about normalizing things that we found that worked well during COVID. I think that, you know, elections are really just such a foundational right and critical to our country's democracy. And part of that is making it accessible to voters, and part of that is making sure that it's secure and safe. And, you know, I think COVID taught us a lot of things. Like, we never thought that we would be able to do digital meetings and vote virtually. You know, I think that there's a lot of things that we can learn from the COVID experience to make improvements and modernize our election system. And I think that this is one of those areas that it just seems to make sense. I mean, the voters I talked to loved it. They were so excited. They didn't have to worry about what times did the polls close. Am I going to get off work in time? Do I have to bring my kids to an appointment? You know, they were able to think about it a week in advance and think about, oh, okay, you know what? I'm swinging by town hall on Wednesday to go to the market, and I'm going to stop and I'm going to vote, you know, a week in advance. And because next week, Tuesday, is going to be too crazy for me. It really gives that convenience and flexibility. And quite frankly, due to the emergency voting process we had in place prior to COVID, we have had a window of voting during that period of time prior to COVID on the books for a very long time. So to me, this just is a change that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Senator. Any other comments? Thank you very much. What we'll do now is move to Senate Bill number 405 by Senator Lawson, an act relating to elections, general provisions. Senator Lawson.
Thank you, Chairwoman Coyne. Good evening. Good evening, colleagues. So this bill would allow citizens who will be 18 years old by the general or special election to vote in a primary, right? So currently, they're voting in the general election, but they don't have the opportunity to vote in the primary where we select the candidates who will be there. So this is, like Senator Oyer just said, I believe a common sense election change. So we have the opportunity to encourage our youngest voting demographic to participate in democracy. I think we should. And as an educator, I've heard this, you know, kids in high school excited in a primary but unable to because they're not yet 18, but they would be in November. So we know that historically this age group, this demographic from 18 to 29 is the lowest voter turnout in elections. I think we have an opportunity to encourage them, get them to participate in the election they'll be voting in November anyway. And I will respectfully ask for your support tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lawson. Any questions or comments by committee members? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Senator Lawson. The next bill.
Thank you.
The next bill is Senate Bill number 423 by Whip De La Cruz, an act relating to elections, primary election dates. Senator De La Cruz.
Thank you, Chairwoman. This requires that a primary election date shall be held on a Wednesday immediately following Labor Day, as long as it's the eighth Tuesday immediately following Labor Day. This bill was introduced because of the town clerks in my district. They said it's very expensive to pay people time and a half to come in on a Sunday to prepare for, on a holiday, to prepare for an election on a Tuesday. So it would alleviate the burden of cost on the municipalities.
Thank you. Senator, any questions, comments? Yes, Senator Reptakis?
I just want to say it's a bill that I think a majority of the municipalities were requesting that the change happen, and I don't think we even got to it. I know my cities of Coventry, West Greenwich, and I believe even East Greenwich requested this, and it fell on deaf ears. So I'm hoping that this is the year that we pass Senator De La Cruz's bill.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions or comments by committee members? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I don't see Senator Morgan here, but I will read through into the record the bill numbers and a description. Senate Resolution number 425 by Senator Morgan, a Senate resolution creating a special legislative commission to study voter fraud. It creates a 7-member special legislative commission whose purpose it would be to study and provide recommendations to prevent voter fraud, and who would report back to the Senate no later than February 7th, 2022, and whose life would expire on April 7th, 2022. The next bill by Senator Morgan is Senate Resolution number 426, entitled Resolution Memorializing the United States Congress to call a convention of states for the purpose of proposing amendments to set a limit on the number of terms that a person may be elected as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and to set a limit on the number of terms that a person may be elected as a member of the U.S. Senate. And then finally, Senate Resolution number 427 by Senator Morgan, a resolution to approve, publish, and submit to the electors a proposition of amendment to the Constitution of the state majority vote requirement for general officers election, where it amends the Constitution to require elections of general officers to be by majority vote. And if Senator Morgan should join us during the evening, we'll certainly let her explain more about these bills. Next is Senate Bill number 516 by Senator Oyer.
Thank you, Chair Coyne. And I also want to acknowledge and recognize my colleagues who have bills that are taking on many of these ideas, including Chair Coyne, Chair Sosnowski. I believe actually Senator De La Cruz's bill about the changing the election date as well is similar concept. I think different approach on all of these. So I really appreciate the opportunity for this conversation, because really elections being the cornerstone of our democracy, making sure that they're safe, secure, and freely accessible to the people is really critical. The more voters who participate in elections, the better our representation is. We've now held 4 successful elections during the pandemic with various changes that have made voting safer, more accessible, and secure. And this legislation is seeking to codify those changes into law, and then also make several technical changes to allow for those larger changes. So many of the things that are covered in this bill have already been discussed among individual legislation that was introduced before. One of which being the new primary date. I believe my legislation moves it a little bit earlier than Senator De La Cruz's, and she's right on the money. The issue with the municipalities is a big one. It's a big cost from the municipalities. Also, though, Rhode Island's primary is the latest in the country, and this bill would move it earlier. That would also give us more time to make sure that we can get our ballots to our overseas military personnel in a timely manner. And this also would remove the witness requirements, which we've discussed already, and it would allow early voting. It would also allow for an online mail ballot request, and create a permanent mail ballot list. I mean, and those are things that it definitely came up as points of discussion. I know that there was a lot of discussion about mail ballots, and folks really liked that option. And being able to vote from the safety and security of their home, being able to take time with their ballots, being able to research candidates while they had their ballot in front of them, and not feeling the pressure of having to make a decision while they're standing there in the voting booth. So providing those opportunities for expanded mail ballot access, and also to go along with that, to also have there be, the mail ballot drop boxes. So that was something that got added in primarily by executive action through the Board of Elections and in cooperation with the Board of Canvassers. But this would make those drop boxes permanent. And then the other thing is that this also has elements in it to have a rigorous voter registration list. That's a topic that's heavily politicized throughout the country. And the reality is that in order to make sure that our voter list is maintained, we need to have a process and procedure to address that issue on a more frequent basis. So this bill would require the Secretary of State to cross-check the voter file at least 4 times per year. And it implements a new process to automatically update records when a voter address is changed. So, again, this is a pretty lengthy bill, and so encompasses a lot of the topics that were discussed on earlier pieces of legislation. I'm happy to field any questions. I also have been working with a coalition of voting rights and voting security experts, I believe some of which who are testifying tonight. So. That being said, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Oyer. Any questions or comments from committee members? Yes, Senator De La Cruz.
Thank you so much. As you can imagine, all of you have heard a lot from your constituents. I've heard so much from my constituents as well. And they're concerned. They care about voter integrity, as do all of us. All of us do. There isn't one person in the Senate that doesn't care about voter integrity. I'm with Senator Oyer on moving the primary date. It's something that we need to do. I know that we don't like to do it because, it's kind of, we've been accustomed to voting in the primary this way, but as she had stated, we have overseas members who need to vote, and it'll bring us into compliance with federal guidelines. So I'm with her on that. Also, the mail ballot drop box. I love that someone can just drop it in a drop box and head home or on their way to work or whatever it is. I am concerned about an individual being able to move to Rhode Island, be here for a week, vote here, and move. I'm not saying that would happen. We only have 4 electoral votes, but I think the requirement to live here for 30 days is a good requirement and should remain. As a few of us have stated here in committee, we've always had early voting, so I don't think there needs to be a change there. That's an emergency provision. And then also, the witness notary requirement, maybe we don't need 2 witnesses. Maybe we only need 1 witness on there. But the notary requirement is necessary, and it overwhelmingly passed in our state because it was designed to prevent fraud, and that was prevalent in the 1980s with regard to ballot harvesting and mail ballot fraud. So those are my concerns, but good portions to the bill that I could see should be adopted.
Thank you for your comments. Any other questions? Yes, Senator Oyer.
Thank you. I just want to address 2 quick things. Thank you, Senator De La Cruz. Not to steal Senator DeMario's thunder, but the 30-day requirement, I believe she's going to be talking about that. That is separate legislation. So I just didn't want anyone to be confused by that. And then the piece about the signature, the piece about the the mail ballot specifically and the early voting. One of the things that, as I mentioned, we did have this emergency voting and prior to COVID, but prior to COVID, we basically had what a lot of folks refer to as just a no excuse emergency voting system. But what that actually was is that when you went into when you went in and you said, okay, I might not be here on election day, so I've got to fill out this application. What you really were doing is you were signing an application, an emergency ballot application, and I believe it was under penalty of perjury that you had to check a box and say, I am not going to be here, or I don't believe I'm going to be here on election day, and I didn't find out that I wasn't going to be here on election day until after the time period of the mail ballots closed. What that does is that's not an open early voting process. It does make people, even though it's kind of considered a no excuse, and I'm not aware of clerks sitting there and asking people for proof of any travel certificates. The reality is that there is an excuse required, and residents are required to sign that under penalty of perjury. So it's not just the same as saying, okay, 20 days before election, we're going to have the town hall open for anybody who wants to come in. There were specific parameters for the emergency voting provisions that people had to attest to, and that was actually somewhat of a point of contention as this issue has been discussed over the years. So there really would be a difference between just calling it early voting, having it be early voting, because those excuse requirements were suspended by executive order during the course of the pandemic. So this bill would basically be codifying the access and the opportunity that voters had during the pandemic for early voting without having to sign an affidavit to do so.
And thank you, Senator. And I believe we have quite a few witnesses to testify on that particular bill. Thank you. Next up, we have Senator DeMario, Senate Resolution 569, resolution to approve and publish and submit to the electors a proposition of amendment to the Constitution of the State of Suffrage. Senator DeMario.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Coyne and members of the committee. And thank you so much to Senator Oyer and Senator Dela Cruz for setting up the premise of my bill for me in their little preview discussion. So I wanted to just first of all say that this is about making sure Rhode Islanders who want to join in the civic process can do so without outdated deadlines. And I want to be very clear about what this bill would do and what it would not do. So what this bill does is it would put a question on the ballot in 2022 about removing the 30-day prior to an election residency requirement from the Constitution. It would then allow the opportunity for the General Assembly to determine the voter registration deadline prior to an election, allowing the possibility to bring us in line with the majority of states who do not have a 30-day before the election registration deadline. What this bill does not do, it does not establish same-day voter registration or any other immediate change to voter registration deadlines. It does not remove the requirement that a voter be a Rhode Island resident or remove any type of voter ID requirement or any other safeguards for election security. So the question might be like, why do we need to do this? And the answer to that is basically times have changed since this 30-day residency requirement was established. So first of all, this is based on the logistics that you used to need to take place around checking paper voter rolls and things like that. With the technology that we have today, that is just no longer necessary. And also, people move, people aren't, more frequently, people aren't immediately aware of elections that are coming up. I'm sure, as we, all were, knocking on doors and talking to voters, it's amazing how many people you're speaking to in the weeks coming up to a primary or even the general election where, they weren't even aware that was coming up, and you're doing that education as you're meeting with them. And so again, this isn't necessarily saying that even people who would take advantage of this are people who would benefit from this are people who haven't lived in Rhode Island for a period of time. They're just people who haven't registered to vote yet. And so what this resolution would do is it would put it to the voters at the next election to see if we want to be able to, again, bring these voter registration deadlines a little bit more up to date. Thank you for your time, and I welcome any questions.
Any questions or comments for the senator? Yes, Senator Reptakis.
Yep, I just want to make a comment. The problem here is that we've got two issues. We got one, no residency requirement or reduction of residency requirement, and the majority of states have at least a 30-day residency requirement in order to participate in the voting process. I just did a quick checkup, and I went to the National Legislators website, and it looks like the majority is 30 days. The other problem we have is if you do have a 30-day minimum residency requirement, then maybe you can reduce the number of days you need to register. But to wipe out both, to reduce the residency requirement and the registration requirement is going to, I think, cause havoc, and I think it's dangerous. So either one of the I think would work, but it's something that we just got to be very cautious.
Thank you, Senator. Any other comments or questions? Senator DeMario?
On to that. Thank you. So I appreciate your comments, Senator Reptakis, and I think that the intention here is basically to change this so that it no longer is something that resides in the Constitution, and instead would be something that would reside in statute. So that doesn't remove the possibility, for example, of saying, of creating a bill that would say that proof of residency requirement for more than 30 days, for 30 days needs to be given at the point of registration, but it would allow for that possibility of that shorter, or of that, kind of closer to the election deadline of being able to register.
Thank you, Senator. Any other comments? Yes, Senator Archambault?
Yeah, thanks. I agree with Senator DeMario. I mean, if we're already down, what's it, 6 months it used to be to establish residency, get a driver's license, all that. If we're already down to 30 days to vote, right? Aren't we splitting hairs? What's the loss in dropping beneath that, as long as you can verify it? Isn't the constant that we're always looking against is fraud? If you don't have fraud, right? If you can show certain that you don't have fraud, then what's the worry? It defies logic to me that you wouldn't have this. Now, if there's fraud, that's a whole different story. And I do get, again, I want to say, Senator Dela Cruz watching astutely here to make sure we don't have voter fraud. I mean that very sincerely. You don't have voter fraud, you're okay. So I like it. I think it's a good bill.
Thank you, Senator. Any other comments? Thank you very much. Next up is Senate Bill number 608 by Senator Paolino. Welcome to the committee, Senator.
Thank you, Chairwoman Coyne. Thank you for having me, members of the committee. I introduced this legislation to encourage individuals to participate and work at the polls on Election Day. At one point in last year's election, there was concern that there would not be enough poll workers to support the needs of the poll sites throughout the state. Also, $60 for a 12-hour plus workday at the polls equates to about $5 an hour for the $60 that they get for the whole day. So that's not even minimum wage. So anybody here and the individuals that support the $15 an hour minimum wage should find this completely unacceptable. Let's give these workers a wage that respects and appreciates the work that they do, keeping our elections available, fair, and safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions, comments? Yes, Senator Archambault.
Yeah, another good bill. I want to thank Senator Paolino. I always look forward on Election Day to going in. We get to inspect the polls. You can't politic there, but you get to inspect. And of course, there are towns, so you know everybody. And I go, hey, Mary, how are you? Hi, Joe, and they're killing themselves. They're there with some cold coffee, a couple of munchkins, and there's a lot of work to do, right? Especially this last election showed that. So it's really nominal, and we're compensating them something more for their day. Nice move, Senator Paolino. I like it.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Reptakis.
I can't even believe that this is not even illegal to pay somebody $60. I mean, where have we been all this time? I think it's a good bill. And again, our minimum wage right now is $11.50 an hour times 12. They should at least be getting paid $130. And I think that's not even enough money. I think for somebody to wake up early in the morning at 5 a.m., to be at the polls at probably 6 and to get the polls ready by 7, and then to stay there from 8 o'clock all the way to probably 9 o'clock, especially when you have to tally the votes, the machines have to probably run correctly to get that tally. Sometimes there's a lot of issues that there's a delay, but you're talking not a 12-hour day. You're probably talking 15 hours, and this should be probably a flat stipend, a minimum of at least $200. And this way you will get those poll workers to show up. And there's been a deficiency where our communities, a lot of cities and towns can't even get enough poll workers because of the pay, number one, and the amount of hours. Thank you, Senator Palino.
Thank you. And Senator Rogers?
Thank you, Chair. I do agree. It is actually considered a stipend. That's how they get away with it. It is considered a stipend. There are actually sometimes where people get paid the stipend and only work a little bit. So I do agree with it. It should be increased. It hasn't been changed, but they don't go by the hour minimum wage or nothing, and they do it by calling it a stipend.
Thank you, Senator Rogers. I don't see any other hands up. The next bill will be Senate Bill number 620 by Senator Archambault, an act relating to elections, campaign contributions, and expenditures reporting. Senator.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I put this bill in at the request of the Board of Elections, and in a nutshell, there are three of them that I have tonight. They're all, I'll be loose with the term, cleanup bills that the Board of Election has looked at that are going to make the system more efficient. This one would eliminate competing reporting requirements related to referenda and consolidate all reporting requirements concerning the independent expenditure and electioneering communications for elections. It's been well thought out. The Board of Elections put a lot of time into it, and it's at their request. I'll take any questions.
Do you want to, any questions on that? Would you like to continue with the next two that you have, Senator?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. The next bill that I have is, again, at the behest of the Board of Elections, is 624. And this bill, again, is a cleanup provision, and it will require all write-in candidates to file, prior to election, a declaration of their intent to run for office with the Secretary of State. It will require the tallying of votes only for contests in which no candidate appears on the ballot. Or for candidate, that promotes more efficiency. They don't have a lot of staff down there. Or for candidates meeting the declaration requirements. Finally, it will require the Board of Elections to report all votes received by declared write-in candidates. Again, they thought about this, and this is what they want to clean things up. Are there any questions on that? Thank you. And the last bill is 625, and that, give me 1 second, please. I'm glad I brought this laptop. This act would allow voters to endorse the nomination of candidacy documents by mail, email, or facsimile, so you get the spectrum, and deliver them to the candidate or board of canvassers in person via mail, email, or facsimile. It will modify the affidavit language of persons obtaining nomination signatures to include an attestation concerning the actual electronic collection of signatures. So it's like an affidavit, you're verifying the signatures. Finally, it would allow nomination papers to be delivered by candidates to Board of Canvassers in person, mail, email, or facsimile by the deadline. It just promotes the ability to get this in. As long as there's no fraud, there wouldn't be disenfranchisement. I'd take any questions.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions of Senator Archambault? Thank you very much. I also have three bills put in for the Board of Elections. The first one is Senate Bill number 621. This act would amend various sections of the law governing mail ballots, including changes to the witness and notary public requirements by removing the 2 witness and notary requirements for mail ballot applications and mail ballot certificate envelope. It would also delete the requirement that persons may vote by mail only if they are unable to vote in person. So we've heard this previous this evening, and this one here is an act relating to elections by mail ballots. Any questions? The next bill is Senate Bill 622, also put in for the Board of Elections, an act relating to elections mail ballots. This act would repeal a mail ballot section entitled, quote, mail applicant not permitted to vote at polls, end quote. The purpose of this repeal is to follow the federal Help America Vote Act, HAVA, and to account for permitting voters to cast provisional ballots at the polling place. Any questions on that one? And finally, also for the Board of Elections, 623, an act relating to elections mail ballots. This act would allow the Board of Elections to begin the certification of mail ballots 20 days prior to Election Day and require notice of such certification sessions. It also establishes a new and more comprehensive mail ballot voter signature verification process. And just so the committee knows, we will have members of the Board of Elections here this evening, so if you have any specific questions, you may ask them. Next on the agenda is Senate Resolution number 15 by Leader McCaffrey, resolution to approve and publish and submit to the electors a proposition of amendment to the Constitution of the state, procedure to fill vacancy in office of the Secretary of State, Attorney General, or General Treasurer. This joint resolution would present to the electors a Rhode Island constitutional amendment which would create a procedure to fill vacancies in the office of Secretary of State, Attorney General, or General Treasurer. Any questions? Next is Senate Bill number 57, also by Leader McCaffrey. An act relating to elections, general state offices, requires a special election to fill a vacancy in the office of Secretary of State, Attorney General, or General Treasurer if more than 1 year is left in the term of office. I don't see any questions. And finally, Senate Resolution number 125 by Senator Reptakis. Do we have him available? Senator Reptakis? I don't see him on screen right now. This is a resolution to approve and publish and submit to the electors a proposition of amendment to the Constitution of the state, referendum on line item veto. This proposed amendment to the Constitution would provide the governor with a line item veto on the budget and other bills for the appropriation of money. And certainly if he wants to speak to that as we go on through the evening, we'll do that. Okay, with that, I think we've gone through all the bills for sponsors and their testimony this evening. Thank you very much for your patience. And at this time, we will now begin taking testimony from the public. For those members of the public who are signed up to testify, if you would kindly state the bill number you are testifying on, especially if you're speaking on multiple bills this evening, that would be very, very helpful to the committee members. And with that, we'll go to Senate Bill number 60. Just as a reminder, Senate Bill number 60 is an act relating to elections, Rhode Island campaign contributions, and expenditures reporting. I believe we have Hillary Levy Friedman from Rhode Island Now on the line. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you, and I'm running to another room so you do not hear my children in the background, which seems very appropriate
Don't worry
for this
about it.
particular bill. Thank you so much. Yes, I am here, Hillary Levy Friedman from Rhode Island Now, to testify in support of S60. You know, this bill really only is 15 words in terms of what it adds to the law, but it expands the possibilities for so many people to run for office and serve in elected office. And obviously this would apply to all parents or guardians, which we need more of in elected office to bring that perspective, but it would disproportionately impact women who disproportionately have to take on or choose to take on the work of childcare. So we really urge you to pass this bill that enables campaign funds to be used both during campaigns and once winners of those elections are in elected office. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Friedman. Does anybody have any questions of the witness? Okay, I see no questions at this time. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Ms. Hannah Stern from the ACLU of Rhode Island. Good evening, Ms. Stern. You're testifying. Hi, how are you? You're testifying on several bills. Could you please note the bill number and then your testimony on each one?
Yeah, so you would like me to just do all four right now?
Yes, please.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I'll start with S60. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, for your time this evening. My name is Hannah Stern. I'm testifying on behalf of the ACLU of Rhode Island in very strong support of this legislation. We'd like to extend our appreciation to Senator Golden for her continued sponsorship of this important bill. Especially for female candidates who are parents, the balancing of child care and campaigning can be particularly difficult to navigate. Both the State Board of Elections regulations and federal elections rulings recognize how critical it can be for a candidate to use campaign funds for childcare. And we just believe it's important to codify this important principle that promotes equity into our statutes. So, again, we strongly urge passage of this bill. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions on Bill number 60 of Ms. Stern? No questions at that time. At this time, you may begin on, I believe, Senate Bill 181.
Yes. So, again, my name is Hannah Stern, testifying on behalf of the ACLU of Rhode Island, again, in strong support of this legislation, which we believe would really just promote equity in voting. Again, we're very appreciative of Senator Mack for introducing this legislation. And Senator Mack actually very well summarized our opposition to the current voter ID law by mentioning in her intro to this bill that this law was enacted to address something that was never actually a problem to begin with. To our knowledge, there has not been a single prosecution in recent memory for voter ID fraud in Rhode Island, but our organization has personally heard about multiple circumstances where voters and individuals were inappropriately denied the opportunity to vote because of this voter ID law and the improper enforcement of it. So ultimately, the burden of voter ID laws tends to most disproportionately disenfranchise individuals with disabilities, lower-income individuals, communities of color, and the elderly. This law has really erected an unnecessary barrier to voting and just remains one more obstacle for individuals who simply wish to exercise their right to vote, and we urge its repeal. So thank you for your time. I'd be happy to take any questions on this bill.
Any questions on Bill 181 for Ms. Stern? Thank you. No questions. Next is Senate Bill 624 you're testifying on? Ms. Stern, 624 is next with your testimony. No questions on. Yep.
Oh, perfect. Thank you again, Hannah Stern, testifying on behalf of the ACLU of Rhode Island in opposition to S624. We believe that ultimately what this legislation says is that contrary to the rhetoric surrounding voting, that every vote does not count. So regardless of whether write-in votes are frivolous or regardless of the futility of a write-in vote, a fundamental right for voters really is to just have the opportunity to make a statement and have their cause tallied. This vote would discount the choices that voters deliberately make in the name of bureaucratic convenience, and we strongly urge its rejection. So thank you again. Happy to take any questions on that bill.
I see no hands at this time. You may proceed with the last bill, 624.
Great. Thank you so much. So thank you again, and thank you for the last time, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for your time this evening. Again, Hannah Stern, testifying on behalf of the ACLU of Rhode Island on S625. We're supportive of this legislation. The ACLU actually filed a successful lawsuit last year on behalf of candidates for office who are campaigning throughout the COVID-19 pandemic to establish an electronic process for the collection of signatures. This process worked very well. We just think it makes sense to officially and statutorily codify and provide this process for candidates into the future. We submitted detailed written testimony on this bill, and in it, our attorney included a few suggestions just for strengthening the language a bit, but otherwise, we think this is a very successful and positive process that we support the permanent provision of. So thank you again for your time. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Stern. Any questions? No questions at this time. Thank you for joining us this evening. And now
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Right now we have Secretary of State Gorbea on the phone to speak about some of these election bills, in particular S516 and 569. Secretary, are you with us? Welcome to the committee, Secretary Gorbea.
Hi, Chairwoman Coyne. It has been such a great evening of important discussions over there in your committee. And it's a pleasure to be able to present before you as Chairwoman. So good evening to all of the members of the committee and to Chairwoman Coyne. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak, although I have to say, it was a little bit like a kid in a candy store trying to figure out which ones. But my very able elections director is going to actually do a lot more than what I'm going to testify on. I did want to specifically highlight, though, two particular pieces of legislation, as hard as it was. And one of them is, of course, the Let Rhode Island Vote Act, Senate Bill 516. And I want to thank Senator Oyer for introducing this legislation and for the coalition of organizations that are supporting this really important proposal to expand voting rights and access across our state. This legislation is really just continuing the progress that we've made over the past 6 years in improving access to the ballot box while securing the integrity of every vote. And I agree, that with what's been said previously in the committee, that we are absolutely all committed to making sure that we secure the integrity of every vote. So at a time when other states are looking at ways to restrict voting options to their citizens, Rhode Island is looking to continue to be a leader in voting access and voting integrity, and really shining a light to the path that others should take. And this legislation keeps us moving forward. So, over the past year, we've held 4 statewide elections under very challenging circumstances. The changes that we've made in response to pandemic safety measures resulted in more Rhode Islanders voting in advance of Election Day, either by mail or early in person, than ever before. In the November general election, we saw more voters cast ballots than in any election in our state's history, despite the pandemic. So, and roughly 2/3 of those votes were cast before Election Day. So, as your Secretary of State, I was thrilled to see this record turnout. However, I was just as excited to see that the voter turnout was roughly the same based on our voting method. The fact that voters cast ballots by mail, early in person, or at a polling place on Election Day, it happened in nearly equal numbers and shows that people want options for when and how they vote. It also highlights the importance of providing access to voting no matter what the voter's preference. The Let Rhode Island Vote Act looks to do just that. Expanding early in-person voting, including weekends, which is something that I argued for way back when I was in my first year, and I'm glad to see it come up again in this proposal. Mail drop boxes, as well as establishing a permanent mail ballot list, will all expand voting access for our state voters. Permanently removing the 2-witness or notary requirement to vote by mail will ensure that a voter's ballot and vote remains private and secure. And the proposal also allows voters whose mail ballots were postmarked by Election Day to count so long as they're received within 3 days of the general election, which is something that I think would have kept a fair number of people enfranchised, and I think would be a good thing, especially given some of the challenges that we saw faced with the post office in this past year. This is something that's already done. The 3 days within 3 days received of general election, it's already done for uniformed and overseas voters, and it should be extended to all voters choosing to vote from home with a mail ballot. The bill also requires my office to establish a voter information hotline, which we actually did for this November election in partnership with the United Way 211. And it fielded more than 3,700 calls in a variety of languages. And I want to give a shout out to United Way and the 211 staff for what a great job they did. But yes, this should be not just, on a pandemic basis, but really codified into statute going forward. The last part of the bill I would like to speak on is moving the primary date from September to August. In 2019, introduced legislation